I walked into the bank this morning thinking I was just there to withdraw cash for an anniversary weekend trip with my girlfriend. But I walked out knowing that my entire financial existence had been wiped out by the two people who were supposed to protect me. It wasn't a gradual realization or a suspicion that crept up on me over time. It was a sudden, violent crash that left me feeling like the ground had dissolved beneath my feet. I remember standing at the counter, watching the teller's face go from professional politeness to a look of genuine confusion and pity. And that was the moment my stomach dropped because I knew something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. To understand why this hit me so hard, you have to understand the dynamic in my family, because for as long as I can remember, I have been the invisible safety net while my older brother was the trapeze artist who constantly fell. My brother has always been the golden child, the one with the charisma and the big dreams that never quite panned out, whereas I was the steady one, the boring one who went to college, got a standard corporate job, and saved every penny I could. My parents always told me they were proud of my independence, but I realized today that my independence was just a convenience for them because it meant they could focus all their energy and resources on fixing my brother's endless stream of mistakes. The situation at the bank started simply enough when the teller told me there was a hold on my account. But when the branch manager came over and asked me to step into his office, the air in the room seemed to get heavy and hot. He sat me down and turned his monitor toward me. And instead of explaining the situation with words, he just pointed to a series of transactions and a massive new lien against my credit that I'd never authorized. He explained that my credit score had plummeted overnight because of missed payments on a mortgage for a property I didn't even know existed. A house in a town 3 hours away where my brother had just mysteriously moved last month. I sat there in that gray office chair, feeling the blood drain from my face, trying to process the fact that my social security number and personal details had been used to secure a loan that I would never have agreed to in a million years. The manager asked me if I wanted to file a fraud report immediately, but I was so paralyzed by the shock of recognizing the cosigner's address as my parents' house that I told him I needed an hour to figure things out before I involved the police. I walked out to my car, my hand shaking so violently I couldn't even put the key in the ignition, and I just sat there staring at the steering wheel while a mixture of rage and heartbreak washed over me. I decided to call my mother first, hoping against hope that there was some misunderstanding or that maybe they had been scammed too. But the moment she answered the phone, her tone told me everything I needed to know. I didn't yell or scream. I simply asked her why the bank thought I owned a house in my brother's town, and the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When she finally spoke, she didn't apologize or sound shocked. Instead, she used that soft, manipulative voice she always uses when she wants me to do something for my brother. She told me that they intended to tell me eventually, but they knew I would say no if they asked, so they did what they had to do to ensure my brother had a roof over his head. She tried to justify it by saying that since my credit was so good and I wasn't using it for anything major right now, it shouldn't matter to me, and that they promised to make the payments themselves so I wouldn't even notice. She spoke about this massive financial felony as if she had just borrowed my lawnmower without asking, completely ignoring the fact that they had committed a serious crime and jeopardized my entire future just to baby a 30-year-old man who refuses to grow up. I listened to her rambling excuses, feeling a physical pain in my chest, realizing that to them, I wasn't a son. I was just a resource to be harvested whenever their favorite child needed bailing out. I hung up on her while she was still mid-sentence, ignoring her frantic calls as she realized I wasn't just going to roll over and accept this. I drove home in a daze, barely registering the traffic around me, my mind racing with the implications of what this meant for my relationship, my savings, and the life I had been building so carefully. When I got to my apartment, I started tearing through my old filing cabinets, looking for any documents I might have left at their house years ago, trying to piece together how they got enough information to pull this off. That's when my phone lit up with a text from my dad, a man who usually avoids conflict at all costs, and the message made my blood run cold. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was warning me that if I went to the police, I would be destroying the family and sending my own mother to jail, and that I needed to think very carefully about whether I wanted to be the son who ruined everything over just money. But as I stood there reading that threat, I heard a car door slam outside, and I looked out the window to see my parents' car pulling into my driveway, and my brother was getting out of the back seat with a look on his face that wasn't shame. It was anger. I watched through the blinds as my family marched up the walkway like a firing squad coming to put down a rebellion, and for a split second, I considered locking the deadbolt and pretending I wasn't home, but I knew that would only delay the inevitable explosion. I opened the door just as my father raised his fist to pound on the wood, and the look in his eyes wasn't the warm recognition of a parent seeing their child, but the cold, calculating glare of a man whose carefully constructed lie was unraveling. Before I could even get a word out, my brother shouldered past me into my living room, pacing back and forth on my rug with his dirty boots, loudly proclaiming that I was overreacting and acting like a greedy corporate sellout for caring more about a credit score than his well-being. The smell of stale cigarette smoke and nervous sweat instantly filled my apartment, turning my sanctuary into an interrogation room where I was the one on trial. My mother came in last, shutting the door behind her and immediately dissolving into tears. But instead of hugging me or apologizing, she stood by the entrance, wringing her hands and sobbing about how hard they had tried to make everyone happy. She looked at me with those teary, pleading eyes and explained that they had only used my name because they knew I was stable enough to handle the risk. Unlike my brother, who had been through so much trauma, which is their code word for the consequences of his own bad decisions. My father took a different approach, stepping into my personal space and lowering his voice to that menacing whisper he used when I was a teenager, telling me that if I reported this as fraud, I would be sending my own brother to the streets and my parents to prison. He poked me in the chest, describing exactly how the police would come to their house in front of the neighbors, how my mother would be handcuffed, and how it would be entirely my fault for not just swallowing it for the sake of the family. I stood there, feeling the heat radiate off him, realizing that he wasn't trying to protect me from the bank. He was trying to protect himself from the reality that he was a criminal. My brother, emboldened by my silence, stopped pacing and started lecturing me about how I didn't even need that credit because I already had a decent apartment and a car, whereas he had nothing and deserved a fresh start. He actually had the nerve to say that technically, they did me a favor by investing in real estate under my name, claiming that in 30 years I would thank them for the asset, completely ignoring the fact that he had zero income to pay the mortgage they had signed me up for. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me as I looked at the three of them, my brother playing the victim, my mother playing the martyr, and my father playing the enforcer, and realized that they didn't see me as a person, but as a utility to be used until it broke. I knew I couldn't win a shouting match against three people who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of gaslighting, so I did the only thing I could think of to get them out of my house before I lost control physically. I forced my face into a neutral mask and lied, telling them that I was just shocked and that I wouldn't go to the police today, implying that I just needed the weekend to calm down and process the investment. The tension in the room instantly evaporated as they exchanged victorious glances, thinking they had successfully bullied me into submission, just like they always did when we were kids. My mother tried to hug me on the way out, whispering that she knew I would do the right thing, while my brother just smirked and told me to chill out before slamming my own front door in my face. Edit. Addressing the question. Since posting this, my inbox has been flooded with people asking how they physically managed to pull this off without me being present at the closing, and the answer makes me feel even more violated. I went through my old paperwork after they left and realized that 3 years ago, when I was helping them set up their living trust, they had slipped a limited power of attorney document into the stack of papers I was signing. At the time, they told me it was just in case they got sick and needed me to handle their medical bills. but the wording was broad enough to allow them to make financial decisions on my behalf. A document I thought had been revoked or shredded years ago. They used that old POA to sign the closing documents for the house, combined with digital signatures that were sent to an old email address of mine that my brother had the password to because we used to share it for gaming accounts back in the day. The bank didn't flag it because, on paper, it looked like I had authorized a representative, my father, to act for me, making the fraud incredibly sophisticated and deliberate. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment mistake. They had been planning this purchase for months, waiting for the right moment when my credit score was highest, and I was too busy with work to notice the inquiries. But what they don't know is that while they were standing in my living room trying to manipulate me, I had my hand in my pocket, clutching my phone with the voice recorder app running the entire time. I have a crystal clear recording of my father admitting he forged the residency documents, my mother admitting they hid the letters from the bank, and my brother admitting he has no intention of paying the mortgage himself. They think they bought my silence with guilt, but they actually just handed me the evidence I need to nuke their entire plan from orbit. And I am currently sitting in the parking lot of the police station trying to stop my hands from shaking long enough to walk inside. Walking into that police station felt like walking to my own execution. Even though I was the victim, years of conditioning had me convinced that I was the one doing something wrong, that I was the one betraying the bloodline. The desk sergeant looked bored until I placed my phone on the counter and played the audio file, specifically the part where my father said, "We forged the signature because we knew better than you." The officer's eyebrows shot up, and the boredom vanished instantly. He didn't see a family squabble. He saw a felony confession. I spent the next 3 hours in a small, windowless room giving a statement that felt like I was vomiting up my entire life story. I had to detail every financial boundary they had crossed, every manipulation, and hand over the power of attorney documents I had found. The detective assigned to my case, a guy named Officer Miller, who looked like he'd seen it all, told me something that finally broke the spell my parents had cast on me. He leaned forward, tapped the table, and said, "Son, this isn't a loan between family. This is grand larceny and identity theft. If a stranger did this, you'd want their head on a platter. Sharing DNA doesn't give them a pass to ruin your life." Armed with the police report number, I went straight to the bank. The difference in their attitude was night and day. Yesterday, I was a delinquent borrower. Today, I was a victim of a federal crime. I sat with the fraud department manager, Sarah, and we initiated the fraud affidavit. I watched as she typed on her keyboard, and with a few clicks, she froze the accounts associated with the mortgage. Then she dropped the bomb. Since the loan was obtained fraudulently, the bank will be moving to accelerate the debt. Essentially, we're calling the loan due immediately. If it's not paid, we foreclose. And since your parents are the ones living there effectively as squatters on a fraudulent deed, the sheriff will be involved in their eviction. I walked out of the bank feeling lighter, but also terrified. I had just pulled the pin on the grenade, and now I had to wait for the explosion. It didn't take long. Update 1. It started around 7 p.m. on Sunday. I had turned my phone on Do Not Disturb, but I could see the screen lighting up relentlessly from across the room. It looked like a strobe light. 47 missed calls, 63 text messages. My parents, my brother, my aunt, even my grandmother, who barely knows how to use a smartphone. I made the mistake of reading one text from my brother. It said, "Cops just showed up. Dad is having chest pains. If he dies, it's on you." Panic seized my throat. I almost called them back. I almost folded. But then I remembered the smirk on my brother's face when he slammed my door. I remembered my dad poking I remembered that chest pains was my father's go-to move whenever he was losing an argument. He'd pulled the same stunt at my college graduation when I didn't want to go to the dinner restaurant he chose. Instead of calling, I listened to a voicemail. It wasn't the weeping victim voice. It was pure, distilled venom. "How dare you?" she hissed. "We raised you. We fed you. And you send the police to our door like we're common criminals? Officer Miller says we're being investigated for fraud. You need to go down there right now and tell them it was a misunderstanding, or so help me God, you will never see us again." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't apologize. She just demanded I obstruct justice to save their skins. That voicemail was the closure I didn't know I needed. I realized they weren't scared of losing me. They were scared of consequence. By Monday morning, the flying monkeys, Reddit's term for the enablers who do the narcissist's bidding, were in full swing. My aunt, a woman who hasn't sent me a birthday card in 10 years, sent me a long Facebook message. Family forgives, and how money is temporary, but blood is forever. I blocked her. I blocked my cousins. I blocked everyone except my lawyer, who I had retained first thing that morning. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Elena, told me to go fully no contact. Let me be the bad guy, she said. If they want to talk to you, they talk to me. She drafted a cease and desist letter and sent it to my parents, informing them that any further contact would be considered harassment. But the real nightmare wasn't over. Elena had run a full, deep dive credit check, deeper than the free one I used. She called me into her office on Tuesday afternoon, and her face was grim. We found something else, she said, sliding a piece of paper across the mahogany desk. I looked at the document. It wasn't just the house. 6 months ago, a credit card was opened in my name. It was maxed out to the limit of $25,000. But the worst part wasn't the debt. It was what the statements showed they spent the money on. I scanned the list. DraftKings, FanDuel, MGM Casino, liquor store, cash advance. My traumatized brother wasn't just bad with money. He was a gambling addict, and my parents hadn't just bought him a house to help him get on his feet. They had stolen my identity to give him a place to live because he had gambled away their retirement savings, and they were broke. They weren't just protecting him. They were using me to bail out the entire family's financial collapse. I felt like I was going to throw up. I wasn't just a safety net. I was the retirement plan they hadn't bothered to tell me about. As I sat there staring at the gambling debts, my lawyer's receptionist buzzed in. "Sir, I have the local police on the line for you. They say it's urgent. There's been an incident at the property." My heart hammered against my ribs. What kind of incident? Elena put it on speaker. The officer's voice was crackly but clear. "Sir, we were serving the eviction notice related to the fraud case, and your brother didn't take it well. We have him in custody, but you need to come down here. He's done something to the house." I drove the 3 hours to the property in a state of dissociative numbness, the kind where you operate the car on autopilot while your brain screams in the background. When I turned onto the street, I didn't need to look for the house number because I could see the flashing blue and red lights reflecting off the wet pavement from 3 blocks away. There were 2 cruisers and a fire truck, not because there was a fire, but because, as I would soon find out, my brother had tried to turn the house into a swimming pool. I stepped out of my car, and the smell hit me instantly, that damp, earthy stench of soaked drywall and standing water. The front door, which I technically owned but had never walked through, was hanging off its hinges. Officer Miller was there, talking to a fire chief, and when he saw me, he just shook his head with a look of exhausted disgust. He walked me to the threshold, but told me not to go inside because the structural integrity was compromised. From the doorway, I could see the carnage. My brother hadn't just done something to the house. He had executed a calculated tantrum designed to destroy the asset so the bank, and I, would be left with nothing. He had plugged every drain in the house, turned on every faucet, and then taken a sledgehammer to the pipes under the sinks. Water was cascading down the staircase like a grotesque waterfall, ruining the hardwood floors, the electrical wiring, and the foundation. The walls were punched full of holes, and spray painted across the living room explicitly for me to see were the words, "Rich boy pays for it all." But the most chilling part wasn't the destruction. It was my parents. They were standing by their sedan near the police tape, my mother clutching her purse to her chest. My brother was already in the back of a cruiser, kicking the window, but my parents weren't looking at him with shame. They were looking at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. As soon as they saw me, my mother broke through the invisible barrier of social decency. She didn't run to me to explain. She charged at me screaming. She shrieked that this was my fault, that I had pushed him too far, that a good brother would have just signed the papers and let him have his dignity. She actually pointed at the flooded ruin of a house and yelled that I had destroyed their family, not the man who had just caused $100,000 in damages. My father stood behind her, silent and gray, looking at the ground, finally realizing that his retirement plan had just flooded itself out of existence. Officer Miller stepped between us, his hand resting on his belt, ordering my mother to step back. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized there was no mother left in those eyes, just an addict's enabler who had lost her supply. I turned to Miller and said the words that sealed their fate. I want to press charges for everything: the fraud, the vandalism, the identity theft, all of it, against all three of them. The next 48 hours were a blur of legal meetings and depositions, because my brother had destroyed the collateral, the house. The bank was on a warpath. They weren't just looking for repayment anymore. They were looking for blood. The civil matter had officially mutated into a serious criminal conspiracy case. My lawyer, Elena, sat me down with the district attorney, a sharp-eyed woman who looked at my family's file like it was a juicy steak. The DA explained that because my parents had utilized the mail and the internet to forge documents and secure the loan, they were looking at federal wire fraud charges in addition to the state-level identity theft charges. The gambling debts I found earlier were the key. They established a clear motive. My parents weren't confused elderly people making a mistake. They were desperate debtors robbing their solvent son to pay off a casino. Then came the update regarding my brother. He was being held without bail because he was deemed a flight risk and a danger to the community. The DA told me that during his interrogation, he didn't even try to deny it. He laughed. He told the cops that Mom and Dad said it was okay and that I was too soft to do anything about it. He was banking on the fact that I would drop the charges to save our parents. He was wrong. On Wednesday, the Hail Mary play happened. My lawyer called me, her voice tight. "Your parents have retained a lawyer," she said, "a public defender, since their assets are frozen. They want to offer a deal." I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they were finally going to plead guilty and spare me a trial. "What's the deal?" I asked. Elena sighed. "They want you to sign a statement saying you gave them verbal permission to take out the loan, and that you only called the police because you had a fight with your brother. In exchange, they promise to pay you back over time, and your brother agrees to go to rehab." I almost laughed. It was insulting. Even facing prison, they were still trying to con me. They wanted me to commit perjury, a felony, to save them from the consequences of their felonies. They wanted me to take the fall, ruin my own reputation, and accept a promise of repayment from people who had just gambled away their life savings. "Tell them no," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Tell them the deal is prison." The rejection of their deal triggered something nuclear. My father, realizing I wasn't going to fold, decided to play his final card. I got a notification from my employer's HR department an hour later. My father had called my boss. He told them that I was the one under investigation for fraud, that I was a gambling addict, and that I had stolen money from them. He was trying to get me fired, trying to cut off my income so I couldn't afford my lawyer, forcing me to negotiate. He didn't know that I had already briefed my HR director on the situation on Monday. When my dad called, he didn't destroy my career. He just handed the DA another witness for the harassment and defamation charges. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at the wall, realizing the war was far from over. I had just received a summons. My parents weren't just defending themselves. They were countersuing me for breach of verbal contract, claiming I had promised to buy the house and backed out. It was a lie, a frivolous lawsuit designed to bleed me dry. But it meant one terrifying thing. I was going to have to see them in court. The months leading up to the trial were a slow-motion nightmare of legal motions and delays. But when the day finally came, the courtroom felt less like a hall of justice and more like a funeral parlor for my childhood. I sat on the left side of the aisle with Elena, while my parents and brothers sat on the right. They looked haggard. My mother had stopped dyeing her hair, leaving it a stark, brittle gray. "A calculated move," Elena whispered to me, "to look like a sympathetic, frail grandmother rather than a mastermind of fraud." The defense's strategy was desperate and vicious. They stuck to the lie that I had verbally agreed to everything, painting me as a bitter, estranged son who had changed his mind and was now using the legal system to punish his family for being poor. My father took the stand first. He looked at the jury, tears welling in his eyes, and spun a tale about how we had discussed the house over Christmas dinner, how I had wanted to give back to the family. It was a terrifyingly convincing performance. For a moment, looking at the jury's sympathetic faces, I felt that old, familiar panic, the fear that they were going to get away with it again. Then it was Elena's turn. She didn't scream. She didn't get angry. She just calmly walked up to the podium and asked permission to play Exhibit C, the audio recording I had taken in my living room the day I confronted them. The courtroom went dead silent. My father's voice rang out from the speakers, clear and arrogant, admitting that they forged the signature because they knew better than me. Then my mother's voice, admitting they hid the bank letters. The color drained from my father's face. The jury's sympathy evaporated instantly. They weren't looking at a confused old man anymore. They were looking at a liar. But the real climax happened when my brother took the stand. He was supposed to corroborate their story, but he had clearly realized the ship was sinking. When the prosecutor asked him whose idea the identity theft was, he didn't look at me. He looked at our parents. He broke. He started shouting that he never wanted the house in the first place, that he just wanted cash for his debts. But Mom forced the issue because she wanted to keep up appearances in the neighborhood. He screamed that they had coached him to lie, that they told him I would never press charges because I was too weak. My mother stood up and screamed at him to shut up. My father tried to pull her down. The judge slammed his gavel, threatening to hold the entire family in contempt, but the damage was done. They had turned on each other. The united front had collapsed into a pit of vipers eating their own tails. I watched them bicker and blame, realizing that their loyalty to each other was just as fake as their love for me. It was never about family. It was always about survival. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. My father was convicted of wire fraud and identity theft. My mother, the same, plus conspiracy. My brother was convicted of all of the above, plus malicious destruction of property. The sentencing hearing 2 months later was the last time I saw them. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly lost all patience with their antics, didn't hold back. She called their actions predatory and morally bankrupt. She noted that they hadn't just stolen money. They had attempted to steal my future and destroy my reputation to cover their tracks. My parents were sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. My brother, because of his prior record and the destruction of the house, got 5 years. As the bailiffs moved to handcuff them, my mother looked back at me one last time. She didn't look sad. She looked furious. She mouthed something at me that looked like, "You'll rot for this." But I didn't feel the sting I expected. I just felt numb. Final update. It's been 6 months since they were locked up. The fallout was messy. The bank, armed with the criminal conviction, formally absolved me of the mortgage debt. The foreclosure went through, but it's not on my record. The house, or what was left of it, was sold as a tear-down lot. My credit score is still recovering from the hard inquiries and the chaos, but it's climbing back up. I sold my house in my hometown. I couldn't stay there. Every time I went to the grocery store, I felt like people were whispering about the son who sent his parents to prison. Even though I was the victim, the small-town rumor mill painted me as the villain who wouldn't forgive his own flesh and blood. I moved 2 states away, took a new job, and started over where nobody knows my last name. I am essentially an orphan now. I have no parents to call on holidays, no brother to be the best man at my wedding. Sometimes, late at night, the guilt creeps in. The conditioning they instilled in me runs deep. I wonder if I was too harsh. I wonder if I should have just paid the debt and cut them off silently. But then I remember the text message, "If he dies, it's on you." I remember the spray paint on the walls. I remember the look in my father's eyes when he tried to get me fired. I didn't destroy my family. I just survived them. I'm currently in therapy, learning how to trust people again, learning that love isn't supposed to cost you your sanity and your safety. It's a long road, but for the first time in my life, my bank account is mine, my credit is mine, and my life is mine. And honestly, the silence is the most expensive thing I've ever bought, and it was worth every penny.